No, don't do it!
Alright class, welcome back to FPL School by your boy, Bacon Boy. And this is episode 5, Ownership, Differentials, Essentials, and Effective Ownership. What in the heck do all these words mean, man? Well, obviously you didn't attend the last FPL class where we went over words and phrases, did you? No. But don't worry, I will be kind, no spanking from me today, and I will also give you a quick rundown of what they all mean. Ownership. This refers to how many FPL players own a player, with this value being recorded as a percentage of teams selected by, or TSB, you might also see. So let's say Harold Kane has a 20% TSB. That means 20% of total FPL players own him. Simple, right? Yeah. But this value is then also used for other things, such as a differential. Differential. This refers to when a player's TSB/selected amount is at a low amount. Now, I say that rather than giving an actual number, and that's because the actual number will vary depending on a bunch of different parameters, and also the context of the player as well. But for argument's sake, right here, we're just going to say less than 5% owned is the golden rule for someone to be classed as a differential here. The opposite of this, though, could be essential. Essential. This referring to a player being essential in your team, mainly because he is so highly owned so that when he scores, a lot of people are getting those points and will massively hurt your rank. So he might be essential if you want to do well. But spoiler alert, as we'll get into in a bit, no player is ever essential. But being essential could also tie into effective ownership. Effective ownership, which is effectively the player's ownership plus his captaincy, but also minus benching as well. Now, how that works is, if you have a player, you have him at 100%, right? You get 100% of his point. But if you captain them, because the points are double, you technically now have him at 200%. And even 300% if you triple captain him as well. Ooh, cheeky. So let's say Salah is 50% owned. 50% of players own Mo Salah. And every single one of them decide to captain him. That 50% ownership now doubles and turns into 100%, and his effective ownership is now 100%. Whoa. Now, the reason that could be quite important is because if you have a Bruno who you didn't captain in a game week, you have him at 100% as you're just getting 100% of his points, right? But so many other people captained him, his now effective ownership is 110%. Oh dear, his overall ownership is now 10% more than yours. Oh no, what does this mean? So what that means is, if he does go and score points, you will drop in rank and be worse off even though you own him and got those points. That's because even though you're getting some points, other people are technically getting more points as they might have captained him, so are getting double the points, but you're just getting the plain, boring, normal 100% single point. So that is all of that briefly explained, but we'll get into a little bit more of that, and more importantly, why they are all important. Like, what can we even use this for, teacher? Why are you just trying to discombobulate and confuse us? Alright, okay, settle down, class, don't worry, as I'll tell you why they are all very, very important, or not, and could all help you understand how you can achieve a better rank and finish much better in FPL. Hey, lovely! So first, let's look at why we might use ownership and all of its fancy offsprings as well. Let's simplify the already simple game of FPL for this example, right? By saying there are only 100 players. So 100% owned means all 100 own him. 50 for 50 and all that, you know, you get them. And let's also say everyone is also on 0 points as it's the start of the season, okay? Just for this example. You own a Bruno Fernandes. 90% of other teams also own Bruno Fernandes. He scores a goal, hey! Plus 5 points to the 90 people who own him. Now, because he is that highly owned, 90% of players have gained those points, but are also all tied on each other as all of them have got the point, meaning they actually only get a gain on the other 10 players as everyone else is getting the points. So let's switch that around. You own a Mason Greenwood, who is only 10% owned. Only 10% of players own Greenwood. He scores a goal, hey! Plus 5 points to only those 10 people who own him. Now, because he is so low owned, 10 people have gained those points, meaning they all get the points and they're on the same, but now they have gained an edge over the 90%. Wow, that is absolutely amazing. Differentials all the way, yes. No, unfortunately, it's not all sunshine and rainbows here, as you're about to find out in a minute. Because, let's flip it again, shall we? You own a Mason Greenwood. 10% of people own him, yeah? But you choose him over a Bruno Fernandes. Bruno is 90% owned. 90% of players own own Bruno. Boom! A goal has been scored. But who scored it? It was Bruno. Oh dear. That is now 90% of people gaining an advantage over you, as 90% of people have gained those points and you have been left in the mud with none of them, leaving you in the worst possible situation right here. So with that in mind, differentials are just a high risk, high reward. You go for that lower owned player and he scores and gets all the points. So hey, you get a big big boy gain. But you go against the higher owned player and they score, you get a bigger loss. But as always with football, ownership and odds never determine an outcome, right? So there does exist a chance that every single differential you get in always work and pay off massively. Wait, you got a massive gain, yes, you're loving it. Or they could completely all fail, leaving you in so much misery, even your wife wants to leave you. Oh dear. Differentials are a decision to make that could either return a bigger profit or a bigger loss. There are also different types of differentials as well. The Bruno Greenwood example was a very straightforward 9% of people own one, 10% of people own the other, and they play for the same team. But something like this is hardly ever that simple in FPL, where you might have 5 higher owned players for a team, so even the lower one out of those 5 isn't quite a differential in the entire game, because they could have like a 20% ownership, but have a lower ownership than the other 4, so they are technically the differential. Or you could have a team like Wolves, where most of their players might actually be quite low owned, so even the most popular one out there could be a differential. And also, obviously, you could own both. You could own the most owned player and the low owned player as well. There's also another subtype that I like to call the money saver differentials, where they might score the same amount of points as the higher owned player, but because they are cheaper, that is hopefully giving you more money put somewhere else, which could hopefully return more points in that somewhere else. For example, owning Van Dijk over Trent, where they both keep a clean sheet and get no other returns, +6 for everyone. You don't get any extra gain or any loss for having either one of them, but now you have an extra 1 million quid in your bank account, which you could put into another player, which could be the difference of getting more points elsewhere. But the key takeaway from this should be why you should pick a differential. You should not choose a player low owned only because he is low owned, but you should choose a differential, especially if you think he can score more points than the higher owned player, if there is one equivalent or comparable. But stuff like ownership and differentials are just more of a nice to have thing rather than the main focus for FPL, for when choosing players and all that, because at the end of the day, all you want to do is choose players who score those shiny FPL points. And then stuff like ownership and differentials and all that are just more of the extra and side thing that you can think about, but you should always just try and focus on the main thing, FPL point. I would always suggest, if there is a very high owned player and you do think it might be a bit risky going without them, but you are also being teased by that lower one, you know, you think they could maybe match or maybe score more, then why not just get them both in? Hey, because then no matter what way it goes between them both, you get the gain in both ways possible. And also having a combination of players is also another differential, as less people are probably going to have both. It's always usually safer to go for the higher owned player because he is the higher owned player, but again, less rewarding when he does score. But again, not necessarily a bad thing. But why might a higher owned player be considered risky going without? Well, that is what some people might call essential. Now, the E word will not be spoken by many, as some believe no player is ever essential in FPL. And I am here to say, yeah, I kind of agree actually. Well, let's say Bruno is owned by 50% of players. Now that's a lot. And he is also averaging a score of 5 points per week. And every week, because he's scoring those points, is affecting your rank quite a bit. But instead of Bruno, you own a 40% Mo Salah, who is averaging 6 points every week. Way! So you might not have the most owned player who is scoring a lot of points, but in his place, you are owning someone who is scoring more points, way, and meaning you are getting more of a gain. Now, the ideal solution here is to have them both, right? But there are literally hundreds of players in FPL who all score points every single week, so no matter what great 11 you have, you will always be missing out on points in some way, you know? So there is never a perfect team containing all of the most expensive and most owned players, you know, as you only have your 15 to look at, so that is just where you should look at. Which is also a good thing for combating someone being essential, as it is possible to not own the highest scoring player in FPL, but still win FPL. What? I mean, it would make it harder, but it's not impossible, as there are hundreds and thousands of different combinations of players, right? Where a certain combination of players might actually net you more points, even if it's not containing the highest scoring player. Now, yeah, it would make it a lot easier if you had all the highest scoring players, right? But it's not essential to have them. See what I did there? So replace essential with should have, and I can get behind that, as you should have or aim to have all of the highest scoring players in your team, right? Who will likely be the higher owned players as we go through the season as well. So that is what we are looking at here. An essential player is not essential if your alternatives are doing just as good or if not better, or they're at least cheaper and hopefully netting you a gain somewhere else with that extra money. Now, obviously, all of this is harder said than done, but you know. But for an example, let's say in your team you have Salah and Ayling. They score you 200 points and 100 points throughout the entire season. And you're an absolute cheek scrub who didn't make any transfers, you kept these two players in, alright? Just for this example. They score you 200 points and 100 points throughout the entire season. And both of them cost you 17 million combined. But someone else went Son and Robertson instead. Scored 175 points and 150 points. Meaning that duo ended up scoring more points with the same amount of money, even though you didn't have the one player who scored the most points in Salah. Yes, owning the top point scorer would obviously make you have more points, right? But if you spread out the money elsewhere, you could actually create a combination which scores more points altogether, which at the end of the day is better. This is also another reason why most people don't try and cram in like 6 premium players in your team, because even though you know they're all going to score right, you could say some are essential, but then the rest of your team is absolutely dog water, terrible, and you will end up with less points. So no one is quite essential. But then the final thing, and the final lonely child of ownership, it is effective ownership. Now this can actually be a bit scary, you know. Oh, shivering my timbers, I'm so scared. As the very fact of owning a player might not be enough. Oh dear. So let's say you own a Bruno who is playing against Watford, but you decide you want to captain someone else, okay? So many other people are gonna captain the Bruno that your overall rank will actually go down if he scores, even though you own him and you get his point. As some other people will have his points double, so that is a bit of a oh dear. But good news, very, very good news actually, where it's not actually as bad as it seems. So let me explain. Where you own that Bruno against Watford, you own him at 100% because you didn't cap. Enough people captained him, his effective ownership is now 110%. He scores a goal, way! Or is it away? Because it's 5 points for you, but everybody else on average is getting 6 points, meaning your overall rank has actually gone down even though you got his point. Also, just to say the numbers aren't exact, it's just for an example. So even though you own the Bruno and got points for his goal, it actually has negatively affected you as you've now gone down in rank because you didn't captain. So does that mean owning them isn't enough and you have to captain them if they're going to be over 100% effective ownership? No. Because let's say you decided to captain Kane instead, right? You've kept that Bruno who had the points, but you've gone for captain Kane. Kane's effective ownership is only 50% and he scores 2 goals, way! Plus 10 points for you, double to 20. Very nice. So now you've got the 5 from Bruno, which originally in isolation was a loss, but you decided to cap Kane, who ended up scoring more points. Where because he has a lower effective ownership, it acts the same as a differential, where you will have that high risk, high reward, bigger gain here, if and only if they score more, right? Remember that. But this might be described a little bit better in total points, so I'll do that now. You own Bruno, but didn't captain, plus 5 there. You own Kane, but did captain, 10 points into the 20, hey. You ended up getting 25 total points from that, yeah. But let's flip it around, are we? You own Bruno, and did captain him, that 5 tint. You own Kane, but didn't captain him, so you only got his 10 points, they weren't doubled. Meaning the total points you got was 20, hey. So, as you can see there, yeah, that is less, isn't it? Numbers are numbers, 25 is more than 20. But in this example, even though you gained an advantage from Bruno scoring, as your ownership was at the 200%, not the 100%, we doubled him, so your ownership was over the effective ownership, you still ended up with less points and therefore less of a rank increase anyway. So at the end of the day, the ownership was actually not a factor. Because if you captained Bruno, that Bruno goal would have put you up some rank, right? And Kane's ownership was low enough that you also gained rank from that. But overall, if you captained Kane, you would have got more points and more of a gain, even though the Bruno goal itself actually negatively affected. Now, the ideal situation here is that any player you own over 100% effective ownership that you haven't captained, you want them to blank, because even if they do score, you will go down. But as always, FPL is never ideal and these things are out of our control, right? We want our players to score points, so it's still okay to like celebrate that way, but you just got to be aware of these things. So what does this all mean? Does it mean that if a player is going to be over 100% effective ownership, we must captain him, as we will lose rank even if we own him and we didn't captain him and if he scores? No! Does it mean that if he is going to be over 100% and we also think that he is going to score, then we should definitely captain him? Again, maybe no. Where to put it simple, if you own a player that will be over 100% effective ownership, if your captain outscores him, you get a profit of rank and points anyway, so that ownership just gets chucked in the bin. If you look at high effective ownership players in isolation, when they score, that might negatively affect your rank, but if your captain outscores him, then you get more points and more better rank anyway. So basically, don't factor in effective ownership, just always try and go for the player you actually think is going to score the most points. Obviously, you're not going to get that right all the time, but that is how you should should be choosing your captain. Now, the big boy problem comes when a very high effective ownership player does score, and as we looked at in the differentials breakdown, you will get an even bigger loss. So it's the exact same situation of high risk, high reward for going for someone else with lower ownership, but also an even bigger loss if a very high effective ownership player scores as well. And I guess there is no right or wrong answer on captaining a player because of ownership, as it all just depends on how it goes down, right? The player who's least owned in the game could outscore everybody, or the player that is the most captain could also outscore everybody. You know, it just depends what happens, and all things that are out of our own control. But what we can control is our captaincy, and at the end of the day, you have the chance to double someone's points in your team. So don't look at ownership, don't try and compare outcomes, only look for the player you think will score the most points, because everything else will be irrelevant at the end of the day if you get it right. But as always with most of these ownership things, they're more of like an extra thing, a side part. It might help between choosing 2 or 3 players, but you shouldn't choose them just because of an ownership level, you know? And it's all part of that higher risk, higher reward, and how you want to go for it at different parts of the season and all that. And now you're aware of how to get a bigger profit in rank if it pays off for you as well. And that is it on ownership and all of its babies, completely debunked and solved. This has been episode 5 of FPL School. Ownership, effective ownership, and differentials. Good class here, yeah. Well, you best be at the next class, or you right there gonna get a spanking.
Don't be a cheeky scrub. Subscribe to Nathan Bacon right now. Don't let your memes be dreams.